recording now. We're going to start recording Spanish as well. Good morning, everyone. My name is Diana Schulach. I am the program manager at Family Focus Resource Center. I work at the Cal State University Northridge office, but Family Focus Resource Center also has 3 other offices located in the lobby of the regional centers, North LA County Regional Center, in Chatsworth, Santa Clarita, and Antelope Valley. We are here to help families navigate their child or young adult's journey through disability services. But we're here to help the family, and we do that by having these amazing workshops, and we get to partner with amazing agencies like Disability Rights California, who is here with us today to present reasonable accommodation in higher education. I'm going to pass it over to I'm sorry, was it Leilani or
Carla.
Carla? Carla is going to do a quick presentation on Disability Rights California so that you know who they are and how to contact them in the future. They're a wonderful organization. So Carla, you can take over.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. My name is Carla, and I just wanted to give a brief introduction of Disability Rights California, which is formerly known as Protection and Advocacy. It was founded in 1978. Governor Brown designated disability rights as the protection and advocacy organization for people with disabilities. Each state have their own protection and advocacy system. California is one of the largest disability rights organizations in the nation. Our regional offices are in Sacramento, Los Angeles, the Bay Area, San Diego. We also do have smaller offices in Fresno, Ontario, and Modesto. Our agency works on special education, public benefits, regional center services, housing, mental health, and other disability-related issues. With that, I will turn it back to Lonnie, who will introduce our presenter of this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Carla, and thank you, everyone. Welcome. Thank you, Family Focus Resource Center, for inviting us. Today, your presenter is Paula Tobler. She is a supervising attorney at Disability Rights California. She came to DRC from a private practice as a labor and employment attorney, specifically because of her interest in employment opportunities and reasonable accommodations for the mental health disabilities. Since becoming a member of the California State Bar 30 years ago, she has practiced law in many different subject areas. She attributes her current path to being in a major auto accident 22 years ago. That gave her a personal experience with traumatic brain injury and post-traumatic stress disorder. Carrying these diagnoses and seeing the disparity between what she can do with little to no accommodation and what others assume she can do based on her can be based on misconceptions of her diagnosis, lit a fire in her to educate and advocate for others in similar circumstances. So thank you, everyone. And now I'll turn it over to Paula.
Good morning, everybody. It's good to be here and talk to you all about higher education and also for resources to help finance higher education. Okay. All right. Took me a minute. I couldn't see the slide. Sorry. Yeah, my name is Paula Tobler. I'm a supervising attorney. I work in primarily employment accommodations, but also do some work in higher education accommodations, and also work with some of the DOR programs, the consumer or the advocacy programs for DOR clients. Okay, next slide. This session is to provide you with general information only. Please do not share your personal information or questions during this training. This session is not confidential. Okay, higher education and training. Next slide. So what is training for purposes of, this is for purposes of Department of Rehabilitation Services. Training can be skill development, apprenticeships, certificate programs, vocational adjustment, general education diplomas or GEDs, vocational training, associate's degrees, bachelor's degrees, advanced degrees, or continuing education credits. All of those would fall within training. Next slide. Can the Department of Rehabilitation or the DOR help me with training? Yes, it can. And in fact, it can be a very useful thing. If any of you out there have ever heard about the horrors of having to pay student loans for college educations, you'll know what a great benefit it is to have an agency that can pay for your college, can pay for a vocational school, can pay for certifications, and can help you get to where you need to be to meet your educational or your employment goals. Hold on just a second. I got an error message on my screen. Sorry about that. That can help you to meet your employment goals without having the expenses that might be there for other people. So the DOR will pay for training when it is needed for your employment goal. But first, you need to know what your employment goal is going to be. So if your employers require that this training for your employment goal, then the DOR will pay for it. Or if you need certain skills in order to do the job that is your employment goal, then the DOR will pay for that skill building, the training to build those skills. Next slide. All right, so here's one example. So we have example one. And you can get ready to do a thumbs up or a thumbs down or whatever you want to do to see if you can answer the question. Jenny loves coding. She wants to find a job as a computer programmer. Most employers require computer programmers to have a bachelor's degree. Can the DOR help Jenny go to college? What do you think? I see some thumbs up. You're right. Remember, everybody said if most employers require the degree, then they will help you get that degree. So if you need a bachelor's degree to be a computer programmer, even if not every single employer requires it, if most of them do, then you're going to need to go to college to get that bachelor's degree. Then the DOR can help you go to college. Okay. Good job. So far, you're all doing very well. Next slide. So how do you know if you need training for your employment goal? Well, you can go to ONET online. And we have the link there. You can look at the Occupational Outlook Handbook. You can look at job postings. There are a lot of different places to look at job postings. And if you can get an idea for what kinds of credentials or training or skills the employers that are posting open jobs want you to have. And also licensing boards if it's a job that needs a license. So for example, to be an attorney in California like I am, you need to have a California State Bar license. And that licensing board requires that you have certain credentials, like I went to law school, for example. You can also, if you're going to the Department of Rehabilitation, you can talk to your rehabilitation counselor about whether you need training for your employment goal. So you're going to start your conversation by what employment goals you have, like what do you want to do for a job? And then if you're not sure whether it needs training, you can talk to the counselor and they can help you research whether it needs training to get you that goal too. Okay, next slide. How can the DOR help me when I'm in school? And these are all important things that the DOR can do. They can help you with tuition, fees. So there are fees that schools charge that are not tuition, but they're still money you have to pay. They can help with that. They can help with the cost of books, supplies, transportation, tools and equipment, assistive technology, uniforms if they're needed for your program, like if you need a lab coat for your lab or something like that. Tutors, if you're needing tutoring to get through your classes, personal assistant services, maintenance, and other services that you may need. Okay. Next slide. This is a question we get asked a lot. Do I need to attend full time in order to get DOR services? And the answer is no. Now, we do get a lot of calls from DOR clients that are having trouble with the DOR, and we do hear a lot that clients are being pressured by their rehabilitation counselor to go full time and get through school as quickly as possible. Now, they're allowed to try to get you through school as quickly as possible. But if you cannot do full time because of your disability, then you are allowed to go part-time, and they should still be paying for the schooling and not requiring you to go full-time. So if you need to attend part-time due to your disability, you can request to attend part-time as a reasonable accommodation to your disability. And under the Americans with Disabilities Act, agencies like the DOR have to make changes in their policies so that you can participate in services if they are needed because of your disability. Okay, I see some questions that are coming up in the chat. I'm going to wait until the end to do questions, but you can go ahead and put them in the chat if you have questions, and we'll just I'm not ignoring you. Well, I guess I am ignoring you, but I'm only ignoring you temporarily, and we'll talk about answering those questions at the end. All right, so how do I decide where to go to school? So that's really a personal preference as far as where you want to go to school. But if we're talking about where the DOR will pay for you to go to school, then that's going to be another thing. So the DOR is going to look primarily at cost. They're going to go for the least expensive option. But they also have to look at the availability of the training program and your individual needs. And if there would be substantial delays, or if it would take a long time to complete your program at one school and a much shorter time at another. And you may also want to look into the school's accommodation practices to see if they can accommodate your specific disability needs. Those can all go into the mix. So it's not just cost, even though the cost will be the primary thing they're looking at first. Okay, next slide. Cost. So the DOR will pay for the least expensive option that meets your needs and is available to you. So for example, they will often want to do for the first 2 years at a community college, because community college is generally cheaper than a 4-year university, and then transfer you to a public college for the next 2 years if you're in a 4-year program. Now, I want to tell you that to look into this, because there have been some news reports and other reports lately that some 4-year colleges in California, even in the UC and Cal State system, are not transferring all the credits from their local California community college. So when I was going to school, which was a long time ago, but back then, basically, if you went to community college, all of those credits would transfer over to if you went to a community college that was affiliated with the state, and then you were going to a 4-year university that was in the UC or Cal State system affiliated with the state, all of your community college credits would transfer. There was not a problem with that. But now I'm hearing that sometimes they're pushing back and not transferring all those credits. So look into that before you decide whether to go to the community college or to public college route, because if you have to redo those credits, it could take you more time and cost more money because you're having to do them over again. It could also be that your community college credits, because of the credits you're getting, or the community college or the 4-year college or university that you're going to, will be fine. And then you don't have a problem. But you want to look into things like that and whether your credits will transfer before you start, because you don't want to do 2 years at a community college and then find out that your credits are not going to transfer. So if you find out that your credits are not going to transfer, that's also a reason to talk to the DOR about going the more expensive route of sending you for all 4 years to the 4-year college rather than 2 years at the community college and then 2 years at another college or university. So just be aware of that. It may not be a problem, but it can be a problem. So it's just better to look into it, check that out before you invest your time and energy in something that might not be your best option. Okay, next slide. Do I need to help to pay for training? No, you don't, as long as you are attending the least expensive school available to you. Or if you choose to go to a more expensive school, if you meet certain criteria, like you may not have to pay for it, but if it's just by choice, you will just pay the difference in cost. So if the DOR tells you, we're going to send you to Cal State Northridge and this is what tuition costs there, and you say, no, I really want to go to USC. You can choose to go to USC, but they can tell you that you have to pay the difference between what tuition is at Cal State Northridge versus what tuition is at USC. And however much money that is, you would be personally responsible for. The DOR would not pay for that. Okay, next slide. Financial aid, grants, and scholarships. So you will need to apply for and use any free money that's available to you. So you do have to fill out a FAFSA form. And financial aid and grants, you have to take maximum effort to get financial aid and grants to be able to use towards your education. If you have a merit-based scholarship, however, you don't have to use it to pay for tuition unless your school requires it. Next slide. What about private schools? So when you choose to go to a private school, you pay the difference in the cost. So the DOR may pay the full cost of private school if it's more expensive. There are sometimes, it's rare, but every once in a while the private school will be cheaper than the public school option. But if the private school is more money, which it usually is, the DOR will only pay the full cost of the private school when any one of these is true. The cost is less than a public school. The training you need is not available at a public school. A private school is better able to meet your needs, or attending public school would delay your progress or take longer than a private school. So sometimes you might find a private school that is more expensive per semester, for example, their tuition is higher, but they have a program that can get you through in 1 year instead of 2 years. So it might actually be cheaper, or at least it takes you less time and you're getting into the workforce earlier. And you might, as far as meeting your needs, that could have to do with your location, geographical location. It could have to do with accommodation needs or whatever different individual needs you have. Okay, next slide. Okay, so now we got another example. So get your thumbs ups and thumbs downs ready. Anna wants to do work as a chef. The local vocational schools do not offer this type of training. There is a private training program near her home that does offer the training. Will Anna need to pay for some of her training? Does she have to pay? Yes or no?
No.
No, she will not have to pay for her training because now normally they would say you have to go to the local vocational school. And if you choose private school that's more expensive, you'd have to pay the difference normally, right? But it says that the local vocational schools do not offer the training she needs to be a chef. So if she can't get training through her local cheaper option, then they will pay for the private option that's near her. Okay, good job. Next slide. Here's another example. Justin needs an associate's degree in order to work as a web developer. Due to his disability, he needs to go to a school that has small class sizes. The local community college has large classes. There is a private school where the classes are only 10 students, and Justin thinks the private school would better meet his needs. Do you think Justin is eligible for private school funding through the DOR? Got a thumbs up? Anybody else? You're right. Thumbs up is right. There is one caution I would give you when it says the local community college has large classes and the other one is 10 students. And due to his disability, he needs to go to a school that has small class sizes. When you're using terms like large and small, sometimes you can get an argument back about, well, how small do you need them? Do you really need only 10 students? How large are the community college classes? Or are the classes you would be taking there as large as like their largest classes, or are they smaller? So if you're going to make the argument like that, it's better if you have like a doctor's note or some verification that you need classes of the size of like 10 students or something like that, rather than whatever size the community college classes are, rather than just arguing on the basis of this is too large or I need something small, because you're going to get questions like, well, how small? Well, what do you mean by that? Like, what exactly do you need? If you don't want to be in that argument, or if you do get in that argument with the DOR, then you want to look for medical verification of what kind of class size you need. Okay, next slide. Okay, so reasonable accommodations. We decided we're going to go to college or university and you need reasonable accommodations. So we'll talk about how you get those. So all public colleges and universities must provide reasonable accommodations in their classes and services. and that's under the Americans with Disabilities Act and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, and in their student housing and dorms under the Fair Housing Act. Now that's for public colleges and universities. They all are required to. Private colleges and universities are also required to, for the most part, because they take public funds. So if you happen to have a private university out there somewhere that takes no public funds at all in any way, shape, or form, then they would not have to accommodate you. But basically, in today's world where there's student loans, there's grant money, there's grants for different programs or research facilities or different things like that. Basically, every private university out there is also taking public funds, and if they do so, then they also have to accommodate you. Now, you want to look at both the physical layout of the campus and classrooms and what you need for the classes that you will be taking to make sure that it can meet your needs. Okay, next slide. So for both the campus and housing, any architectural barriers barriers in the building must be removed where that's readily achievable and able to be carried out without much difficulty or expense. And this is mostly based on the university's finances. All new construction or alterations made after 2010 must comply with the ADA standards for accessible design. That's the law. I will tell you, however, I do presentations at ADA conferences a lot, and then I go to the other sessions while I'm there. And I was just the end of last year was at a presentation by an architect who was talking about how there isn't always compliance. They're not necessarily making builders comply with those ADA standards for accessible design in new construction. So even though it's supposed to be that way, it might not be. So check out to make sure that it is what you need. If they don't have to remove the barrier, you can ask for accommodations like moving to a different dorm or a different classroom. You can also ask for accommodations like assistance with getting from place to place. Like, for example, there have been classes that are, high on a hill, and it's very hard for someone with mobility issues to get there. So they might provide like a golf cart to get you there, or help you to get a motorized wheelchair rather than manual or something like that. So there are different things that you can ask for as an accommodation to help you have access. And if they can't accommodate you in the setup that's there, then you can ask to move to a different dorm or classroom that will meet your needs. Okay, next slide. Service animals and emotional support animals. So service animals can go anywhere on campus that the handler can go. A service animal has to be either a dog or a miniature horse, and it has to be individually trained to do work or perform tasks for the handler with a disability. And those tasks must be related to the handler's disabilities. The school can only ask if the animal is required because of a disability and what work or task the animal has been trained to perform. They can ask you a bunch of questions about what your disability is or what, every detail. The other thing, though, that a lot of people leave out of that equation is they also have to be appropriately trained for what they call public access. And you can train your service dog yourself, or you can have it professionally trained, but it has to be very well behaved to be able to go wherever you go. So, for example, I have a service dog. I have two dogs. One dog hates being out in public. She would not be able to be a service dog. She's she does perform tasks for me around the house. She would perform them for me out and about as well. But if I took her to campus, or if I took her on the metro and places that I go to, restaurants, things like that, she doesn't like to be around crowds of people. Sometimes she could bark if she's upset with something. If other dogs get in her face or something, she doesn't like it. So she's not appropriate, even though she does perform tasks for me. My other dog is rock solid. Dogs will bother him. He'll ignore it. He doesn't bark. He's very calm. He stays where he's supposed to be, loves being out in public. Everything's fine. He's very chill. So the task is what makes them a service dog, but whether you can take them around, they also have to be well behaved. They also have to not have any accidents, but it also means you have to make sure that you're taking them out where they can go appropriately. And they also have to always be under your control. That means having to have them leashed, but also where you're paying attention. So if they're on a leash where they can get away from you and lunge at somebody, for example, and these are the calls that we get sometimes, then you are not going to be able to have your service dog there. And if they cause any problems like biting someone, then you could also have liability for that. So if your dog is not quite there to where they could really be in class and be with you all the time and really behave themselves and be, chill about things, then start working on that before you go to college, so that by the time you're in college, they're fine with strangers in your dorm room. They're fine with, cafeterias and classrooms and large lecture halls or whatever circumstances they're going to be in. Just make sure you get them trained before you go there, and then you won't have any problems. But you don't want to wait until you get there and then have problems, because then they can tell you can't have your service dog. And it's a lot harder to get that back if you've had a problem than it is to just take care of it before it's a problem. Emotional support animals are allowed only in housing areas, but they do not have to be trained to perform any particular tasks. They must be housebroken and in the handler's control, and it can't be destructive, like they can't destroy the housing areas. Okay. Next slide. Auxiliary aids and services that you can get, for example, note takers. Right now, the human note takers are not as commonly given on college campuses. They usually will have subscriptions to AI, to programs like Otter or Otter AI. And then they will let you use that. If that's not working for you, then you need to tell them and explain why that's not a good option for you. Another example of auxiliary aids and services is an ASL interpreter, electronic readers, captioning, and specialized gym equipment. So you have access to the gym as well as to classrooms. Next slide. The school is not required to provide personal aids and services. So many personal aids and services that are required in K through 12 education are not required for higher education to provide for you. So if you have relied on certain services in high school, for example, then you need to check to see if you would still be able to get those services in higher education, because it's not the same. A lot of things are not the same. So you need to be prepared to handle things the way they work in higher education, which is a little bit more difficult than K through 12. Next slide. For the educational services, the school is required to provide materials in an accessible format. And there have been some lawsuits about this recently where they, for example, were not accessible to the visually impaired or not able to be read by screen readers. If there are other issues with the format, then they need to provide it to you in an accessible format. And they must provide equal access to extracurricular and non-academic activities, as well as just your academic classes. So if they have a career services office and they provide career services assistance, they have to provide it in an accessible way for their students with disabilities. If they have other activities, they also have to provide, make those accessible for all their students, including students with disabilities. Next slide. So let's talk about the process. And this is going to be a little bit different from what you're used to if you haven't been to the university before. So again, K through 12 is very different. So K through 12, you have, you might have an IEP or a 504, that follows you every year. Meetings are set up. Things are pretty organized, hopefully anyway. Well, you get to the university or the community college, they will not have your IEP. They won't have records of your disability status. They won't know anything about you. Your records do not follow you to new schools or grades like they did in K through 12. So you show up, they have no idea whether that you even have a disability or have any needs unless you tell them. There also may be different standards applied as to whether you have a disability and what is a reasonable accommodation. And we have a link there to a whole fact sheet about that, the differences between primary and secondary education. So if you go to the college or university, they should have a disabled student services office. There is a trend now for them to be calling them other things because I've decided disabled student services isn't the best thing to call it, but whatever they call it on your campus, there should be some office for students with disabilities to get the services that they need. So you're going to need to go to them and let them know that you are a student with a disability and what you need for your classes or for your dorm or whatever your needs are there. So they won't know anything until you tell them. And you want to go to disabled student services offices and talk to them before your first day of class, because you don't want to be assigned to a dorm room that's not accessible to you and then have to fight to change it. You don't want to get to class and be in class for however long it takes them to get your accommodations in place. And meanwhile, you're struggling in class or maybe even failing in that class. So if you're going to have needs that are going to take a while to put together, especially, then you want to make sure you talk to them as soon as possible so they can start working on that. And also start talking to them so that, like, if there are any disagreements about whether you need something or whether it's reasonable or they have to do it or not, you can get that all worked out before you start class, because you want to start with your best foot forward and ready for success, not trying to work out all the details while you're trying to also go to class. You may need to go back every semester as your classes, classrooms, and professors change. So that's different too. Like, your accommodations don't necessarily go with you. You're going to have to check in. You also might have to check in during the same semester. So if your accommodations are not working for you and you need something else, you need to go back in there and tell them and ask for what else you need. If you need to, if you are not getting your accommodations, so let's say you go into disabled student services and they say, yep, we can give you these accommodations, and you're not getting them, then you're going to have to go back and talk to them because maybe your professor's not getting them. So we actually had a situation like that with someone who actually had wanted to go to a private school program, a DOR client. The DOR said, no, you can go to your local community college. They have a program in this field. It's a lot cheaper. So you're going to the community college. The community college says they can accommodate your disability needs there. So there's no need for us to pay for the more expensive school. So he went to the community college, and the community college said, yes, we will give you these accommodations. But when he went to his class, the professor was not providing those accommodations. And so he was struggling. He was failing his classes. He went to talk to them and they said, well, we don't have other professors that teach that. And that is something that is required for you to graduate in this program and get your degree that you need for your employment goal. So he had a lot of problems, and that ended up, actually, though, he called us because he was having problems with that. But that ended up being an argument that we used to get him transferred to the private school. Now, the private school said that they would provide the accommodations he needed. The structure of their program was also different, so it provided a lot more supports that made it easier for him, and he didn't need as many accommodations. But they gave him what he needed, and it turned out that he was able to graduate from there very quickly with high grades, and actually got an internship while he was there and had a good job when he got out. So that worked out very well for him. But if he had just had that initial conversation with DUR where they said, nope, community college is cheaper and they will accommodate you, so that's where you go. And if he had gone to community college and said, they said, we're accommodating you, but then his professor wasn't providing the accommodations, he just said, oh no, I don't know what to do, and just failed out of these classes, then nobody would have fixed that for him. So he needed to try to get that resolved. And then ultimately he needed to call Disability Rights California to get a CAP advocate to help him to find a better resolution, which ended up being the private school. So be on top of that and look to resolve those problems as quickly as possible, because again, you don't want to wait until like you're failing or you're struggling or things are really going off the deep end before you're trying to resolve these differences. Because even if the disabled student services is acting in good faith and they really think these are accommodations that should be easy to give you, that doesn't mean that it always happens when you get to the classroom. Okay, next slide. Okay, so as you're thinking about what accommodations you need to ask for, you can start with asking for accommodations you had in K through 12. So if you think about like what kinds of things you had in like in your IEP, for example, that helped you. Well, let's say you needed more time on tests, then you can ask them for more time on your tests. If that helped you. But you can also think about what you need at the new campus and with the new classroom formats at your college or university. Because it's going to be a little bit different and you might have different needs. There on most of the college campuses now, they have groups of students with disabilities who meet together and discuss things. So you could also join those groups if you have one on campus and talk to them about what kinds of experiences they had and do they have ideas of, whether you should be looking at different accommodations. You can also get information about what are better professors to take that are more accommodating or, different practical issues that you might have. They can give you guidance on that. So just think about what you're going to need, and that's what you're going to figure out. You need to do that. You can also ask your family members, especially your friends or different people that maybe have gone to college and say, how was this different? Like, what kinds of things do you think I might need? Or um, if you're looking through the college brochure or looking at it online and you're noticing some things, you could talk to people who know you well and say, well, do you think I'd be able to handle that? Or do you think I'd need an accommodation to be able to make that work? You can do your homework and think about what you need. So disabled student services should be looking at each client's needs on a case-by-case basis and in an interactive process with professors, administrators, and the student to figure out what they can do for you. You may be asked for medical documentation, so be prepared for that. Sometimes you have medical documentation that's easy to get. Sometimes it can be hard. If you're going to need to go to a specialist to get an updated medical documentation record, can take a while to get an appointment. Then again, the earlier you're thinking about this and going to disabled student services, then the earlier you'll find out that they're going to want to hear something from your doctor and the more time you have to go to your doctor and get that for them. So just be on top of this as early as possible and be prepared for that. Okay, next slide. Accommodations will not be approved if there's an undue hardship, so they're too difficult or expensive, or if they create a fundamental alteration of the course. And that's fundamental alteration is kind of a weird phrase, but it just means that it changes the class so much that it gives an unfair advantage or does not teach the same concepts. So colleges and universities are very protective of the fact that their degrees mean a certain thing, that they have a certain reputation, and their grades mean a certain thing. So if these accommodations would mean that getting an A in that class would mean that you didn't learn the same concepts or don't have the same skill sets as somebody else who gets an A in that class, then they're not going to want to do that because they're going to say that fundamentally alters what it means for you to have taken that class. You didn't get the same concepts. You don't have the same skills. And so for each class, they can look at that and also for the degree as a whole. Because you take college degrees and that's used to get into graduate school, to get jobs, for things like that, where they're looking at it and they look at the school, the reputation of that school, and then what degree you have and how you did in your classes. And they're relying on that meaning certain things about what skills and aptitudes that you have, what you can do and how you will do in graduate school or in a job. So they want to make sure that that means the same or generally the same for everybody who has those same classes and those same grades and that same degree. So anything that fundamentally alters that, they don't have to do. So when you're thinking about accommodation, think about ways where you are learning the same things that everybody else learns. You're just asking to have a different aids to help you to learn it because you learn differently or because your access to it is a little bit different. So it's not about you can just excuse me from, math class because, math is difficult, even if it's because of a disability. It may be like, well, maybe you should be in a program that doesn't require a math class or something like that, but you can't just say, well, you need to just give me a passing grade in math, even if I can't do the pass the test or something like that. They're not going to do that. Okay. Sometimes an accommodation will be approved, but a professor will refuse to do it. And that's what happened to the person we were talking about before. Like, he got the accommodations from Disabled Student Services, but his professor said, I don't care, I'm not going to do it. This can happen because professors in colleges and universities can have what they call tenure. So if they've been there long enough, do all the things they're supposed to, they get tenure, then it's very hard to fire them. So they can take the attitude of like, I don't want to do it, and you can't make me because you're not, you can't fire me over it. So what are you going to do? But there are also a lot of professors on campuses that are maybe tenured, but are happy to accommodate you. There are also professors on campus that are not tenured. There are all kinds of different options. So if you have a professor that is not honoring your accommodations, go to Disabled Student Services right away to try to work something out. Because again, you don't want to get too far behind in your classes, then waste your time and energy and then have to worry about withdrawals or different things on your record because you just waited too long to talk about it. If you're seeing those problems up front, go directly to Disabled Student Services and see how you can work on that problem. So Disabled Student Services may be able to get the professor to accommodate you, and they might have a talk with them and say, look, you just need to do it. And they'll say, okay, I didn't want to, but I guess I will. Or if the professor refuses, especially if they have tenure and they can't make them, they still might be able to change you to a class with a different professor or a different classroom setup that will help you to pass the class and get the accommodations you need. And even when it's really severe, like that case that we had where that professor that refused, and he was the only professor that taught that, and that's the only way that he could graduate, then that still is the time to talk to DOR about changing you to a different school. You don't want to wait until you've spent a year struggling with someone who won't accommodate you and then try to make changes. So you want to be on top of that. As soon as you're seeing some problems, go to Disabled Student Services and let your DOR counselor know and see if you can get it worked out. And for the most part, I mean, I don't want to scare anybody. For the most part, people get accommodations on campuses. It can vary a lot from school to school. So that's another thing to look at when you're deciding where to go to school. Try to get as much information as you can from like the groups of students with disabilities on campus or other resources to find out how well they accommodate their students. Are they known as a school that takes accommodation seriously? Are they one that kind of like just, well, it's a law and we'll kind of half-heartedly do it, but we really don't care that much? Also look at whether the things you need are the kinds of things that would be hard for them to do. So for example, if they're an old campus with a bunch of old buildings and a bunch of things that are not very accessible for mobility issues, for example, it's going to be hard for them to change that. So maybe even if they really want to accommodate people, maybe it's not really going to be possible for them to, so maybe you're better off just choosing a different college. Same thing with the technology that they have available in their classrooms, or their attitude towards technology in the classroom, or their materials. Like, are their enrollment and admission materials accessible for your disability? Because if they're not, then you want to question right away whether your classroom materials will be. How serious are they about having their materials be accessible? So look at those things ahead of time if you can. Anytime you have a problem, if you can find it, have a better school to begin with, that's great. And even if you're there, if you can get it resolved as quickly as possible, that's better. Okay, next slide. Okay, so we have some resources. So we have the Educational and Training Services through the California Department of Rehabilitation fact sheet. That's on our website. A number for the ADA National Network, and a disability discrimination fact sheet for colleges and universities. That's also on our website. Okay, next slide. I think that's the end. Yep, how to get DRC services. So if you need one-on-one assistance, you can call our intake line at 800-776-5746, or you can submit online for assistance. Okay, so did we do have time for a Q&A? You actually have a lot of time for Q&A.
Wonderful. Oh my gosh, that was so helpful, especially like I said, my kid is about to transition. So this is really timely and wonderful. I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording then, and we can do question and answers. I think there are some questions in the chat, so I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.